We're live. We're live now. Okay, put that away. I don't know if you could see that, everybody, taunting people with our supply of Clorox wipes. Hello. Sorry, that threw me off my start a little bit. My lovely assistant, ladies and gentlemen. No, do not show off our toilet paper. This is serious. The joys of working from home. All right, that's enough. Okay, we've got toilet. Okay, I see. Good. We've got toilet paper and we've got Clorox wipes. Congratulations to us. Sorry, folks. That is just my partner having a little fun as we get started here. Welcome back to, it occurs to me now, hopefully anybody joining us from having read about this in the newspaper today are going to be thinking, what is this all about? We're not usually like this. We're usually far more serious, but we're all getting a little bit stir crazy, aren't we? This is the Penn Yan Action Coalition's continuing online discussion from our community read of The Line Becomes a River by Francisco Cantú, where we discuss themes and questions that have been set forth by one of our Action Coalition members, Claudia, and various members of the Penn Yan Action Coalition have provided their responses to those topics. And we welcome all of you viewing from home to add your comments about the topic as well. Now, normally I have two computers here, and I kind of look off to the side when it's time for me to read one of our questions and answers. Oh, Scarlett made it. Hi, Scarlett. Glad you could be here. You got your comment situation worked out. So yeah, normally I have two computers, but my other computer is having a battery issue. So I'm on one computer, so I'm gonna have to be switching between my live tab and the tab that I have our questions and answers open on. So I might occasionally look like I'm sort of staring into space. Hopefully it won't be too weird. Today's the day we start part 3 of the book. We have gone through parts 1 and 2, partially in person, back when we could still do that. And then largely part 2 has been these online discussions. And we have had a fantastic time digging into this text. You know, when we planned all of this, of course, we were hoping that all of our sessions would be in person, that we could meet face to face, get together in a circle and hash out these difficult topics. And that has obviously not worked out, and it's been a challenge and it's been a struggle. But we have enjoyed keeping the conversation going, finding alternate ways to do that. And actually, if we'd followed our original plan, we would be all done by now. We would have had our 4 meetings at the library, and we would have had a capstone event at Keuka College, and we would be done, and we would no longer be thinking about these issues every day. And I think that one of the stealth benefits of this whole situation is that we're getting to dig into each of these topics that Claudia has come up with really, really deeply. We're getting to spread it across a wider period of time in a way that I think helps maintain our momentum rather than diluting it. And I know that the overall goal ultimately will be hopefully that people will find some way of taking action around these issues when all is said and done. So we're happy to keep doing this. I will now dig into today's topic, and what I do if you're newly joining us, I read Claudia's topic and some of the notes she provided for it, and then I go through the comments that were left by other Penn Yan Action Coalition members ahead of time. I asked that they give me some thoughts, so I'm not just sitting here twiddling my thumbs waiting for people to comment in real time, and that's worked out pretty well. Sometimes I digress and I have my own little comments. And also, if this is the first time you're joining us, I like to give my caveat that I have not begun reading this book because I did not get a copy before the world shut down. So I do my best to make relevant comments based on what I read from the Penn Yan Action Coalition planning group's thoughts and observations. So today's topic is on personal responsibility and accountability. And Claudia writes, Cantú once again opens part 3 with a wolf motif on page 165, this time in the context of Carl Jung's thoughts about individuation, or the opening up of a dialogue between our waking consciousness and the often repressed preoccupations of our unconscious mind. That's on page 164. As individuals, as a society, and as a nation, Jung asserts that we have become acclimated to viewing, quote, others as the very devil, end quote, while failing to look within ourselves. That's on page 163. On page 164, he claims that we need to, quote, recognize the selfsame nature of the other. Do you agree that individuals need to accept and acknowledge the evil within themselves before they can begin working toward change? Do you think that this applies to countries as well? Do nations need to accept and acknowledge the dark sides of their histories before they can move forward to bring about change? So there's a lot to unpack there. It's pretty heavy. Sometimes I reread the entire thing. Let me just go back and read questions that Claudia poses about personal responsibility and accountability. So Claudia asks, do you agree that individuals need to accept and acknowledge the evil within themselves before they can begin working toward change? Do you think that this applies to countries as well? Do nations need to accept and acknowledge the dark sides of their histories before they can move forward to bring about change? And in the context of the themes of this book, I think it's clear where these notions are coming from. Oops, I just did something with my tab. Are we doing a sufficient job as a nation looking at our own dark sides, negative aspects of our histories in terms of addressing the immigration issue, our responsibility for it, our complicity for the issues that are driving the waves of migration that we see. So I think that's where it kind of connects to the book. Again, always correct me if I'm wrong. We do have some thoughts from our Penny in Action Coalition compatriots. I got some notes from Scarlett first. Thank you, Scarlett. Scarlett writes, as in each part of the book, there is much to ponder in part 3. And she says, I spent the morning sorting the clippings I have saved since autumn 2017, which was when the Penny in Action Coalition began to come together. And as I sorted, rereading some of them. And as Cantú writes on page 229, feeling suffocated by the pain of thousands of individuals and families who are trying to cross the border for a better life, people whose humanity is constantly being trampled. The whole process is suffocating to everyone involved, and we are all involved to some extent. Is the humanity of the country being suffocated? Is our immigration process another virus? Let that sink in for a second. Sorry, I'm kind of leaning in to read my screen here. A lot of our discussions have been shaped by current events, more so than they would have been if we had done this a month earlier. It's an interesting phenomenon to watch our conceptions of these questions shift and change in real time as we begin to see examples of new situations coloring and refracting our previous conceptions of some of these issues. Scarlett goes on to say, Cantú observes the diminishing effect of the immigration process as he describes the defendants shuffling into the courtroom, page 182. Those of us who have attended some of the hearings in federal court in Rochester in 2018 will remember the defendant appearing diminished. Cantú has given me a word for what I remember feeling, suffocated. And Scarlett is referring a couple of times here to the the event that sort of brought the Penyan Action Coalition together. And I didn't get involved until a little bit later. And I don't know, how much it's my place to talk about that, but suffice to say that there was a traffic stop that led to an immigration situation for someone from our community. And I could leave it to if there's members of the group in the comments who would like to describe that in more detail so that we're all kind of on the same page about where this group came from. Feel free. Maybe that's something we could also, it might be posted on the Facebook page someplace, but it never hurts to reinforce that sort of origin story. And I think Scarlett makes an excellent point, pointing out the diminishment that she observed in the process of watching that person go through the immigration court system. And this word suffocated feels very apropos. I feel, this is me jumping out to my own personal comments now, I think there's something that proponents of the immigration system conveniently elide, which is all these myriad little ways it's made harder than it has to be. The immigration process, the court process, seemingly simply to add additional hardships to those going through it. And we all hear, well, maybe we don't all hear, but I've certainly heard and read accounts of that. And I think Scarlett is referring to accounts of that process. That's just unnecessarily dehumanizing. I see no adequate explanation for sort of the cattle call vibe of some of these proceedings. Maybe not when we're dealing with cases up here in northern states, pretty far removed from the border, but certainly down at the border, where you're dealing with mass court dates and things like that. And I've seen no adequate explanation for any of these other little cruelties that are hardly legal requirements. One thinks of instances where tiny little children are sometimes considered somehow competent to speak on their own behalf. So I guess from that, I get this idea of, like, okay, we need a system of some sort, but does it have to be so callous? And I think that a lot of the defenders of this system just kind of glide over that question, which is kind of annoying, but that's my Alex opinion. Your mileage may vary. Sorry, sometimes I go off on a little tangent like that. We still have some additional points from Scarlett here. Scarlett continues, I was struck by Cantú's observation on page 180 of the, quote, massive seal of the United States of America, a giant eagle with its head turned as if to look away, unquote. Are we as a country looking away? It certainly feels that way. Scarlett addresses some of Claudia's questions, which, as I remind us, do you agree that individuals need to accept and acknowledge the evil within themselves before they can begin working toward change? Do you think this applies to countries as well? Do we need to accept and acknowledge the dark side of their histories before they can move on to bring about change? And Scarlett responds, yes, as individuals and as a country, we do need to acknowledge the evil within us before we can bring about lasting change that represents the best of us and the ideal of freedom of movement in the seeking of a better life for each of us, a life that is one of dignity and full inclusion. Scarlett finishes off by saying, referring to Monday's comment about the Border Patrol, on page 187, Jose's lawyer tells of an agent who was, quote, framed by his own colleagues in the patrol because he was too human, because he showed too much compassion in the line of duty, end quote. Cantú nodded. That is an interesting and somewhat damning observation. Let's see. We've had some comments on our video. Sorry that my posture is so atrocious. Diane writes, the old concept of man's original sin appears in a lot of writing in various forms, and the idea of confession is to accept that personal responsibility. You don't have to be religious and adhere to any one faith to figure the importance of the individual accepting mistakes, because without that, a person really can't improve. Very good point, very true. And it works on a personal level, certainly, and it certainly seems like there's some national level of confession and absolution that could be enacted. And we see that in, it's not just the immigration issue that some of us feel the need for that acknowledgement. Some say that the United States' original sin is slavery, and that's something that there is debate around how much acknowledgement is still needed to address the fallout of that original sin. So it continues. Let's see. Oh, we've got another comment. Hey, Mickey and Ed are here. Mickey says, we have friends who have fought through the system, and one of the things most don't know is how the financial costs build as barriers. Lawyers, court fees, etc., can total tens of thousands, and years of uncertainty as it creeps through the layers required. Yeah, and I think that's another factor that is conveniently ignored in the debates about this. We talk of having a system where we avoid cruel and unusual punishment and having punishments that fit the crime and everyone having an opportunity to make their case and innocent until proven guilty and all this stuff. How well does that work when people who already came here with nothing are ending up with legal fees in the tens of thousands of dollars? And I think in those who support the system, there are those who just sort of don't think about that, whether on purpose or because they're unaware of it. And I think there are, unfortunately, those who think that it is the just deserts of those suffering those legal costs and things. They're getting what they deserve for breaking the law, and they don't stop to think of how out of sync with the scale of things those costs can be. And I think we all expect, for our own personal selves, if we ever should find ourselves in legal trouble for whatever reason, we expect a certain level of fairness, whether that expectation is naive or not. But they find it very easy to deny that fairness to others that they deem unworthy. Speaking of Mickey, she also sent me some comments ahead of time, responding to the personal responsibility and accountability theme. She writes that page 190 begins Cantú's discussion of his mother's with her Mexican identity and a feeling of worthlessness, etc. This was because of the images she learned from her father that damaged her self-esteem. What will the long-term effects of that same kind of talk that occurs every day in this country about all sorts of people who are now the, quote, others, that we are made to look down on or worse, fear? Mexicans, Central Americans, Muslims, Sikhs, and now with COVID-19, even Asians. What damage are we causing to all the children and young adults in this country or the world when they hear this constantly? Are we so fragile that we must belittle others to feel good about ourselves? When did we lose our feeling that we are all people to be valued? We're just different, and that difference can be a strength. That is a fear that I have as well. Mickey continues, I found this section of the book so hard to read, having been through the struggles of our friend. I believe Mickey is referring there to the situation that led to the creation of the Penny in Action Coalition. Like picking at a scab, bringing back fresh the sadness, frustration, guilt, and anger, but a good reminder of the trauma these actions cause in more than just the individual, but the whole circle of friends, family, and all the professionals like Border Patrol, guards, and the whole court system. Yeah, each case of this kind of illegal immigrant situation is it's not something that just affects that individual who is scooped up. There's an entire community around them, and it does include, I think it's wise to have included, in that circle of impact, Border Patrol, guards, the court system, local sheriffs, other law enforcement like that in the case of events that occurred up in this neck of the woods. Let's see. All right. And we have some comments from Cindy. Cindy writes, at the end of the sharing about Jung's thinking, Cantú on page 165 says in response to dreaming of a savage bull, lion, wolf who wants to come to you, we want to quote, split it off. It becomes all the more dangerous. The best stance to say to the beast, please come and devour me. Do we need to be devoured by the inhumanity being practiced in immigration concerns, by the coronavirus, before we change our practices and thinking? Do we need to hit rock bottom before climbing to the light? That's a heavy thought. I think there's a lot of temptation in a lot of these life and death situations, pressing social situations to try to push it away from us. But that just leads to, it's the opposite of what Cantú and what Diane was referring to about the power and the strength in confessing our trespasses. And I think maybe that might be what Cantú was referring to by letting the wolf devour us, by passing through that challenge. Maybe you can come back to a brighter side. Cindy shared a personal experience. Thank you for sharing it, Cindy. And I hope you don't mind me repeating it since you sent it to me. I assume it is okay for sharing. She had a troubling thought about the concept of others recently, the impetus to other people that we encounter in our lives. 2 different times, she says, I was driving to the Branchport Library to use their Wi-Fi in the parking lot. She saw people out for a walk that she did not recognize, she says. And she wondered, people, are you relocating here during the health crisis? I saw them as others. And that's a big issue for those of us here in Yates County, as I'm sure is the case for anywhere that is sort of a resort destination, places where there's a large contingent of out-of-towners who come in for the summer. If you're not from one of those places, you might not have paid much attention to this, but people in situations like ours are asking those out-of-towners, if at all possible, to stay away, practice that social distancing taken to the next level where you don't even, you stay in the community you're in. So Cindy had a reaction to seeing people that she did not recognize. Perhaps these are people who have come down to stay at their lake house, get away from Rochester or wherever they might be from. But Cindy says, perhaps I should have initiated a conversation with them from 6 feet away. I could have acknowledged their perspectives and shared mine. I did not do this. I shied away, not even knowing if they were locals or not. Developing an understanding between us would have been more positive. Are there similar feelings with immigrants? Is it the job of the Border Patrol to deliberately not want to know anything personal about the individuals who are trying to come across? No understandings between them? And that seems to connect back to the quote, the situation that I believe it was, Scarlett, who wrote about the situation where a Border Patrol agent was suffered due to his seeing the humanity in the folks that they are dealing with on a daily basis. Cindy also shares that she and her husband Jim watched the movie No Country for Old Men the other night. She remarks she might not have watched it if she'd known a little bit more about it ahead of time, but these things happen. She says, it was interesting, however, to see the border practices in West Texas in the 1980s when the movie takes place. Quite fluid, subjective. In one example, sort of paraphrasing, oh, you were a Vietnam vet, so was I. Come on through, says the official at an entry point. An elderly woman says to a man who was Mexican, I have never before seen a Mexican in a suit. Interesting observations from cultural artifacts such as films like No Country for Old Men. I should check, see if we have any more comments. So we do have some more comments. Sorry, since I'm flipping back and forth between tabs, I'm not seeing the comments as I normally would. We've got a comment from Anne. Anne says, I think the coffee shop section was Cantú's way to serve those he somehow had offended, for lack of a better word. Interesting how this virus has put power in the hands of those that will pick vegetables, those who will serve, those who will clean, putting themselves in danger for others. Good observation, and one wonders how long those observations, those considerations will last when we get beyond the moment of crisis that we're in. And we have a comment from Claudia, our writer of the topics. Claudia says, I think that Cantú had to recognize that what he was doing was wrong before he could change his work with the Border Patrol. That's making peace with the wolf. I think a country has to recognize what it has done to contribute to the problems other countries are now facing. Have our foreign policies, economic policies, and interventions contributed to the problems these countries are facing, which then lead to people wanting to flee? And I see that argument go around and around in circles in the places where people are debating these issues, and it seems like a reasonable question to me, but at times it is discarded out of hand. And I think it's interesting that we have a strong sense of personal responsibility, of certain strains of personal responsibility, at least in this country. But it's interesting to see where the limitations of that end up lying. Sometimes it's hard, but necessary. Let's see. We've got some more from Cindy here. Cindy says, somewhere in part 3, maybe Jose says that the people who try to cross again and again are family men, good workers, trying to be with their families, and that we need such good workers. After the section about Jung's thinking, Cantú writes a description about the routines in the morning at the coffee shop before it opens. There's that coffee shop section that was just referred to. He writes about the routines of the work that is done in the plaza or courtyard before opening. He writes about conversations between two people who ask questions about each other's families and show in each other that they are equals, hardworking, ordinary, caring about the little or big things that are important. This is how we are introduced to Jose. And I appreciate that Cindy included a comment about this and her next and final paragraph, because as having not had a chance to read the book, I'm hearing a lot about Jose. He's obviously an important figure in the book and to Cantú, but I think Cindy does a good job of crystallizing the importance of Jose to the book for those of us like me who have not read it yet. Cindy writes, conversation about certain topics were deliberately avoided between Jose and Cantú: border patrol work, immigration status. Were they not good enough friends to trust each other? Was theirs a superficial friendship to be forgotten? Cantú's whole book is about Jose. It is written for Jose and for us to know Jose. So that really helps me to understand the importance of Jose as a character and as a person. That brings me to the end of the comments that I was provided with ahead of time. And I'm not seeing any more comments being added in real time right now. But as I always like to mention, once this video is done and I'm not live anymore, the video stays. People can watch it. People can comment on it. If you are watching at home live and you're thinking, gosh, there are some people in my life who might be really interested in this, but they're not on Facebook, I do also post all of these on YouTube. I know that that's not a perfect solution. If you're not on Facebook, you might not be familiar with YouTube, but it's one of the stopgaps we are able to make use of to get it, to make these conversations a little bit more available to a wider array of people. So if you know someone who could take a link from YouTube and watch these videos, then by all means. They're hosted on the library's YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube and search for Penn Yan Public Library, you'll find all of the library's videos, and among them are these discussions, which should be adequately labeled. I see we've got one more comment from Scarlett here. I think this question that Claudia raises is key. USA as a country has not publicly acknowledged its role in setting up the situations that have resulted in the current time. I think that is very true. And until we can acknowledge that about ourselves, I think we will continue to have trouble making any kind of headway resolving these issues. You can't end an argument if one side just completely ignores their own role in the issue. I've got another comment from Mickey. Oh, good. FYI, Longs is an essential business and I believe still has books available to sell. Yes, I will read the book at some point, I promise. And Cindy offered me a copy too. Part of my self-care routine is that I'm just reading things right now that make me distracted from the world. So I will get to reading this book, which sounds so wonderful, and the excerpts that have been included in these discussions certainly show me that it is a beautifully written and important book that I would be reading right now if all this other craziness hadn't started. But I'm still reading An Instance of the Finger Post by Ian Pierce. That's doing well for me to take my mind away from everything. So, but thank you. And that's good of Mickey to point out for any of the rest of you who are watching this but do not have a copy of the book. You can get a copy from Longs, call ahead. They're doing strong social distancing, and if they've got copies available, I'm sure they can get one out to you. Thank you, Mickey. Thank you all. I will end now, but yes, you can go ahead and keep commenting. Don't stop. It was good to see an array of different folks discussing here today. So thank you for that. Tell your friends. Get into the conversation. We don't learn if we don't talk to one another. All right. Have a great night. You all will be back on Friday at 6 with the next discussion session. All right. Go have dinner. Bye-bye.